Good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure tonight to introduce our speaker, Rachel Potter. Rachel earned a BA in botany at the University of Montana in the Natural Sciences building where Morton Elrod taught eons before. She is an early member of the Montana Native Plant Society, past board secretary, and grinds, if not greases, the gears of the Flathead chapter. With Pete Lessica, Rachel co authored the Montana Native Plant Society publication, Montana's Pioneer Botanists Exploring the Mountains and Prairies. She came to work in Glacier 50 years ago next spring. Wow, amazing. And has been marveling at mountains and flowers there ever since. Rachel lives in Columbia Falls with her family. Welcome, Rachel. Thank you so much for joining us. And we did want to share that if this sounds like a familiar program, it may be. Rachel has given this a few other times, but I know I'm not alone in being excited to hear it for the very first time. So thank you, Rachel, so much, and take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Alex. And it's really great to have everyone here tonight. So, tonight, I'm excited to be able to take you all on a couple of trips with University of Montana biology professor Morton Elrod and botanist Marcus Jones, first in 1909 through what was then the Flathead Forest Reserve, and then they came back in 1910 in the newly established Glacier National Park. So, where did we come up with this? Peter Lessick and I think maybe 2008, 2007, we were having lunch in the park. And if you don't, Peter is a co founder of the Native Plant Society. And we hatched the idea of doing a slideshow celebrating early park botanists as part of the celebration for Glacier's centennial in 2010. So I did a whole bunch of research. Pete gave a couple of programs, but of course there was so much more material that I found that I couldn't do anything with. So I put together these programs here and because I had extra material. So here's the centennial was coming up. This was long before many of you are familiar with the book that we edited. We were authors on some of the essays of Montana's pioneer botanists. So this program was all kind of before that. Okay. Why am I so excited about doing this and I'm willing to do it yet again? First of all, I love stories. We all love stories. And kind of somewhat remarkably, both Elrod and Jones wrote a lot about these trips and when they were there. Secondly, I love wildflowers. That's kind of what we're all about, right? We all love wildflowers. And thirdly, it's immersing us in Glacier Park. And I don't know about you folks, but it's been really kind of dreary fall and it sure is getting dark. And I'm so excited to be able to take you back up into the high mountains. Okay. Morton J. Elrod grew up in Iowa in 1897. At the age of 34, he was hired as UM's first biology professor, and he moved with his family to Missoula. And I learned about Elrod from a compilation Dr. Jim Habeck did a while back. It was a mammoth job, as there are 75 feet of Elrod papers at the University of Montana archives. That's a whole lot of archives. Elrod was really a remarkable man. Habeck describes him as an extremely engaged field naturalist, an avid photographer, and a devoted and demanding teacher. He seemed to be interested in really just everything in the natural world. He had unlimited energy, and he must have been an unmatched multitasker. Habeck, just sort of overwhelmed with all this material, started trying to put it together a chronology, and it just didn't make any sense until he realized, no, he really was doing 10 different things at once. Okay. Marcus. Okay. This was before we put this together before George Dennison's book on Morton Elrod, and I've included some of his work in this, but not a whole lot. Okay, I first learned about Marcus Jones in an article that Annie Gard wrote for Friends of the Herbarium newsletter well over 20 years ago. What does that say? 2002, 23 years ago. So Marcus Jones was educated in the classics, but he was a self-taught geologist, chemist, photographer, mining engineer, librarian, and preacher. I got this from Annie. His passion, though, was for botany, and he collected vast numbers of plants, tens of thousands throughout the West, but primarily in the Great Basin, and he was a leading botanist of his time. He was hired by Deer Lodge farmers to testify in 1905 at the age of 53 to testify in court at the smelter that the smelter at Anaconda was poisoning their crops and livestock. He quite delighted the courtroom and readers of the local papers talking about smoked oats and stating that Perkins prize peas were not much good for soup or show. The expert defense witness for the Anaconda Company was J.W. Blankenship, a botanist at the University in Bozeman. So Morton Elrod also testified for the farmers, and he nearly lost his job at the university, but luckily he didn't. Well, you can imagine how that turned out, farmers versus the mighty Anaconda Company. But as we know, of course, the farmers were right. It was a huge, poisoned everything. Now it's a huge Superfund site. But it was here at the trial that Jones first met Elrod. So, and Elrod recruited Jones to teach at the Flathead Lake Biological Station the subsequent summers. Elrod had founded the station in 1889 in Big Fork on the banks of the Swan River, and it wasn't until I think 1913 that it was moved to its present location at Yellow Bay. So the quotes from Elrod I used here come from handwritten notes as well as unpublished manuscripts I found at the Elrod collection at the University of Montana. There were he wrote a number of newspaper articles that I also quote. I learned from Dennison that Elrod was hoping to write a book more than his guidebooks about Glacier, so all of the material makes a little more sense. In the Elrod papers, there was also a manuscript titled Notes on the Flora of Glacier National Park by Marcus E. Jones, where I got the Jones quotes used here, and it was never published. Okay, after the classes at the biological station were over in August, Jones and Elrod and others from Big Fork likely took a boat to Summers. And then from Summers, the train to West Glacier. Remember, cars didn't make it to Belton and West Glacier until 1914. The train had come through in 1891. So Jones wrote, the tourist should not fail to have plenty of time at Belton, the western gateway of the park. He should send his baggage to Lake McDonald by stage and walk. It is only a short walk across the Crystal Flathead River to the Great Forest. Now, don't forget, this is 20 years before the 1920 fire, so that forest between West Glacier and Apgar looked real different. So, to the Great Forest where one is in the midst of enormous cedars. They stand so close that the sunlight rarely flecks the ground, and it is twilight under them at noonday. Where the sunlight occasionally come are several species of vaccinium, the beautiful evergreen trailing vine Linnea, strawberries and raspberries, senecio and asters. After a delightful walk, the road turns and the green water of the lake comes into view under the great trees. Lake McDonald lies like a silver island in the dense mass of greenish black evergreen forest. This forest borders the lake to the water's edge till it blends in the blue and glacier flecked mountains at the Continental Divide. And here's a picture of Elrod's taken from further up the lake. And it says Glacier National Park, Montana, land of beautiful scenery, mountains, glaciers, waterfalls, forests, and game. So they took a boat up the lake to the hotel built by George Snyder in 1895. In 1906, Snyder had sold the hotel to John and Olive Lewis, and by 1914 they had built what's now known as the Lake McDonald Lodge, but it was just the old Snyder Hotel at the time. Jones writes, mosses reach their highest development here. Lichens, white, yellow, and gray, abound and cling to every rock and limb. The deeper shade is full of orchids, ferns, and the brilliant pyrolas. Now, pretty much these historical photos that I'm showing you were taken as far as I could tell during these trips, unless I note otherwise. So they outfitted from the head of the lake with a guide named Tom Scott. And here's Tom, and Elrod wrote on the back of this photo, guide Tom Scott on his big white horse. I don't know. I get a kick out of this. Either that's a really big horse or Tom was a pretty little guy or some of each. Okay, Elrod writing again. The party consisted of Marcus E. Jones, nest of Salt Lake City, Percy Stone, then a lad from Missoula, Tom Scott, the guide, N.A. Forsyth, photographer of Butte, a friend of Forsyth's from Minneapolis, and myself. And here's a photo by Forsyth. He was taking stereo pairs. So if you look at these at the Montana Historical Society, congratulations on the new building. They have stereoscopes, and you can put it over there and things come into 3D. It's pretty cool. And this is of boats at Lake McDonald. It says boating on pretty Lake McDonald. I love the lines of these rowboats, and I think it's just great that the Glacier Park Boat Company has kept these lines or boats with these lines. They're now made of fiberglass, but it's these wonderful historic, this historic line, which I just was thrilled when I saw this photo and thought, they're still doing them. Okay, Jones writes, on the wet north slopes we meet the first Devil's Club, a fitting name for this horrid shrub-like herb, almost as high as one's head, which is armed throughout with terrible spines which one does well to avoid. The ground is red with the Indian paintbrush, and the stream is fringed with the brilliant Lewis's mimulus. And there are many asters and daisies, particularly the tall fleabane with its large purple flowers. So they headed up Snyder Creek, so right behind the hotel, and Jones continues. Right under the precipitous wall that prevents the view of Sperry Glacier, we pass out upon a series of ledges, a rod or two wide, rising in tiers to the foot of the wall a few hundred feet away. These benches are full of tiny lakelets, a few inches deep, and are brilliant with all sorts of flowers. The lakelets are fringed with rare grasses, sedges, and the yellow and red mimulus. Excuse me, but you never can have too many pictures of monkey flowers, right? He goes on, these steppes are the botanist's paradise and are full of rare Arctic flowers that have persisted through the ages since the glacial period. So he collected the type specimen of Carex plectocarpa, or gooseneck sedge there. And the type specimen, most of well, some of you may not know, that's the specimen that the species was described from. So it was really a great thing that he was there. And he also collected Glaucus gentian here. The presence of both these rare species and many others actually contributed to Logan Pass, and a bunch of it. There's a map that shows the area, the high elevations around Logan Pass were designated as the first ever Montana important plant area in 2010 because Logan Pass, quote, Logan Pass and places like this right near there harbors an exceptional number of peripheral and disjunct Arctic alpine plants at the southern edge of their geographic range. Um, and here is the range of Glaucus gentian as seen on iNaturalist. I don't see a record in Glacier, but this is just records that have been recorded on iNaturalist. If you aren't familiar with iNaturalist, it's really a great tool. And there are, I think, a couple different presentations on the Montana Native Plant Society YouTube channel that help explain what you can do with iNaturalist. Okay. Jones continues. On the edge of the ledges is a fringe of purple mountain laurel or red heather. And we land with the baggage, tents, beds, provisions, cameras, botany collecting material, and all. It was a grand place to camp. Well, excuse me, this picture was not taken up underneath Sperry Glacier. This looks more like down the Swan or something, but I just couldn't resist. They talk about botany collecting material. And I don't know if you can see, there's the, they've got their corks, their spiked boots back there. Here's a chain, something for either digging plants or prospecting. Anyway, it was pretty fun. And Jones writes, wherever there's a flat ledge, we find little carpets of grass and sedge sprinkled with flowers, moss filling the spaces. It's a gorgeous spot. So Elrod actually took this photo over 20 years later, but he was taking photos of glaciers before 1909. And here's what it looks like nearly 20 years ago. So I was pretty thrilled to find in his archives, these are photos that the USGS has been using to demonstrate the shrinking of the glaciers, but I found in his papers notes about when he took this. And he says, one could step from the solid rock of the low place to the solid rock ice of the glacier. At present writing, which was 1931, the ice at the pass is some distance from the summit. The glacier has greatly lessened in volume. In due time, unless climatic changes occur, which is very unlikely, the mountain valley, cirque on which Sperry Glacier now rests, will be as free from snow and ice as the glacier basin on the south, where they'd just been camping, which was ice covered not many years since. And you can look at these photos and many others on the USGS Repeat Photo website. Dennison also notes that Elrod became increasingly interested in glacial recession, and after studying Raphael Pumpelly's reference in his 1880 expedition through the park, Elrod concluded that the maximum of the park's glaciers must have been somewhere around 1860 to 1875. Well, he was very close. It was around 1850, 1855, we know now. And a large number, many of his plant collections in the park were below glaciers, with notations of how far it was to the ice. So he was also kind of tracking them, the glaciers shrinking by when plants were coming in. Now, of course, now it seems like a week doesn't pass without some climate-related disaster in the news. But 20 years ago, when Dan Fagery and the USGS started publicizing the shrinking glaciers, these were really among the first images to bring the stark visual reality of a changing climate to the public. I guess we didn't listen enough. But one thing that's noted here is that Elrod was standing on top of the ice when he took this picture. So these are actually not perfect um, uh, repeat images because the ice is gone. Okay, so here are the guys up on the glacier, and fourth side says Mammoth Ice Fields. And here, that's Tom Scott in front. Um, the guy Tom Scott, that's Marcus Jones. I assume this is the friend of Forsyth's from Minneapolis, and Percy the boy. Okay, Elrod writes, we prowled on the glacier most of the day. The sun was bright and warm. The snow of the past winter was all melted and pure ice was exposed. The ice was beautiful and very slippery. We roped together, 6 of us, and worked in and out among the crevasses, admiring the tints of blue and green in the ice and the grand panorama of mountains. Wearied, we were sitting on the rocks on the ice surface, watching the clouds form on the mountains of the divide to the north. The clouds rolled and tumbled, becoming denser and denser. One after another, the peaks were obscured by clouds, the vapor masses ever coming nearer and nearer. We were still in beautiful sunshine, but I suddenly sprang to my feet, saying, we are a set of fools. We're a half-mile from the rim, and we must cross 25 or 30 cracks and crevasses. I move we start at once and make great haste to reach camp before we are enveloped by clouds. And just to give you a little, here's a picture. That's Terry DeVoke was up there when the day turned. That's a person right there. See that little person? This is really a grand panorama. Otherwise, there's not much to for scale there. Okay. A hurricane of wind was blowing up the gorge from the country below, so that the pass one could scarcely stand. Then came the rain with hail, sleet, and snow. It was impossible to face the blizzard. Jones had a coat on with glass photography plates in a pouch in the back. And apparently, as they were climbing down over the head wall, it blew up over his head and he had to drop it and the down the cliff. Elrod continues, at camp, the horses had tails to the cold wind, heads against the rocks. The poor beasts could not escape and were driven hard against the rocks. The time they got to camp, their tents were completely flattened. Eventually, they made a wall of rocks. He said, the men staggering under their burdens. By much effort, a fire was started, coffee was made, which cheered the spirits of all. This photo was taken the next morning. It's familiar to many of us. It was on the front of Men in Glacier, which was published in 1975, a book about history of people in the park. And I don't think most people didn't know that's Marcus Jones on the left, working on his plant specimens. And I guess the friend from Minneapolis, Elrod writes, by morning, the storm had quieted. All about was snow and hail, piled and drifted. Shortly after noon, the clouds parted and the sun came out, warm and life-giving. Then was seen that rare and beautiful combination of mountains, fresh snow, flowers of different colors above the snow, and butterflies flitting from flower to flower. It was pretty nice. They traveled over Lincoln Pass then, to Lake Ellen Wilson. So here's where they went. Here's from up Snyder Creek from Lake McDonald Lodge. And then they turned off here and on up. They camped somewhere in here, head wall underneath the glacier. They were up on the glacier for a few days, came back. No Sperry Chalet yet. This is about close to where Sperry Chalet was, up over Lincoln Pass and down to Lake Ellen Wilson, and then eventually up over Gunsight Pass. Lyman Sperry had built the trail to the glacier, I believe, in 1902, and then he continued it over Gunsight Pass after that. So there was a trail. So they spent that next night at Lake Ellen Wilson, then which Elrod had named Lake Louise. Elrod named everything kind of his own names. A lot of them didn't stick. And Jones said Ellen Wilson was a deep little lake nestled at the foot of Gunsight Pass, fed by the opalescent streams from the glaciers above. And here's some photos. And here's our guys packing up that morning at Lake Ellen Wilson. And looking back down from Gunsight Pass, here's another one from Dee's. Jones writes, as we wind our way over the alpine meadows, around boulders and cliffs, down over the steep, rare flowers peep up. Well, I have my own story about that steep. I was backpacking, I don't know, 24 years ago with my family up there. It was real windy and I lost my footing and went tumbling and broke my leg. I'm really lucky I didn't go over. There's places that you don't go over, but enough of that. Of my own relationship. Okay. Elrod or Jones says it's amazing. The dwarf blue columbine is a great find. The polemonium and phacelia, so rare on Sperry Glacier, are here common. Our stay is all too short, and as we pass down over the dangerous cliffs, we go almost wild over finding the rare Asplenium viridi, one of the rarest ferns, which peeps at us from the wet crevices. So he's going wild over finding a fern, our kind of guy, right? Well, here we are, and Elrod wrote with this photo. It was taken there at the foot of Gunsight Lake. Marcus E. Jones is shown at work on his plant collections. Camp at Gunsight Lake in 1909 was memorable. Snowbanks and ice fields on the high mountains were constantly in view, day or night, for the nearly full moon illumined the peaks with light, yet beautiful radiance. It is not an uncommon thing to lie awake half or even all of the night, looking at the moon above the mountains, and strange to relate, one feels almost as refreshed as if he had slept all night. The great mountain on the right is Gunsight Peak, down whose sides rush many white torrents starting from snowfields or glaciers above. And elsewhere, he wrote, as we sat in camp and sipped our coffee, we watched the sunlight fade on the summits. The shadows lengthened as the darkness approached, and the black forest became blacker still as twilight faded into darkness. Well, sorry, this is a photo of Gunsight Lake in the morning because the sun's coming from the east, but I like it. Okay, they spent a whole number of days exploring all around there. They were up on Gunsight Mountain and all around the Jackson Blackfoot Glacier Basin down towards St. Mary Valley. Elrod notes that they were looking at plants and everything else, but also prospecting. Now remember, I think prospecting, this is 1909. It's not a park yet. And yeah, everybody was looking for minerals. Okay, Elrod noted that Blackfoot Glacier was just a regular graveyard of insects. So here we are, some photos. A Forsyth photo, he says, a dangerous resting place, Blackfoot Glacier. That's Tom Scott there on the guide, and this is Morton Elrod. I can tell by his hat. This photo was not taken that day, but it's a historic photo from a few years later, but I like it. So there it is, a couple of guys up on Blackfoot Glacier. They're still collecting plants, including this rare asphodel. It's another plant on the southern edge of its range. So they were planning on hoping to stay longer, but Elrod got really sick. He says he was shaking so hard, too hard to stay on a horse or even walk. He put hot stones in his bed back at camp at Lake Ellen Wilson. And then he wrote, back at Lewis Hotel, I had only one desire. I wanted a tomato. It was not to be had. I did get a lemon, and it was the best thing I've ever eaten. Well, that's the end of the trip, the end of the summer in 1909. Elrod goes back to teaching at the University of Montana. Marcus Jones goes back presumably to Salt Lake. Little bit about these guys. Marcus Jones was not a particularly happy guy. He suffered from frequent headaches and bouts of depression. He never did publish what would have been his life's work, The Flora of the Great Basin. And he was continually in conflict with other botanists and could be really nasty. He must have gotten he was not welcome in many journals, and he published his own botanical journal on a printing press that he bought and ran himself. I guess, nobody could censor him if he was printing it. Referring to another botanist, he said, quote, "He was a renegade clergyman, a sodomite socially and a stench in the eyes of all decent people." Well, he was a brilliant botanist. But I thought it was really interesting that his biographer made a point that Jones's happiest years were in Montana. He speculated that that it was because Jones was surrounded by interesting young women at the biological station. Well, that certainly could have been. Here's a photo of Elrod called them collecting trips, not field trips, up on, it looks like it's on the northern end of the Mission Mountains looking over to the Swan. This is Marcus Jones here, Gertrude Norton, who I wrote an essay in that's about in the Pioneer Botanist book. That's Elrod's dog. He pops up at quite a few places. And Elrod referred to these trips from the station generally as collecting trips, not as field trips. Many students at the biological station were teachers, and you figure they didn't have wonderful illustrated textbooks and things. So they would bring back rocks and insects and press plants to teach their students. It's a pretty classic photo here. This looks probably like camp at Yellow Bay. They would go down there and camp from Big Fork, where the station remained in Big Fork till 1913. I think that Marcus Jones probably had a really good relationship with Elrod. A rather unusual thing for him. They were both really brilliant, had a huge amount of energy, and possibly they weren't really competing with each other. Elrod he was a major generalist. He wasn't a particular botanist, and Jones wouldn't have seen him as a professional threat. I get a kick out of this picture. I mean, he must be having fun. By now, he's 56 out there on a log boom. It also looks kind of terrifying, but does look like he's having fun. You can tell him by that hat. Anyway, over the next winter, Jones wrote and published with the University of Montana Botany Notes. It's really quite a work looking at it. You can find it in the archives, documenting 1,700 species in Montana with descriptions, habitats, lots of stuff. And here's a picture of a stone crop he named after Elrod. Actually, he named a whole number of plants after Elrod, but none of those names stuck. But to me, there's no mystery why these were Jones's happiest years. He was in Montana. He spent a whole lot of time in Glacier Park, and we certainly know, as John Muir said in 1902, it's the best care-killing scenery on the continent, in Glacier Park. Well, it was Glacier Park by 1910 when Jones came back with Elrod again after the classes at the station were done a little earlier in August. They didn't have quite enough stock, so it sounds like a number of them walked all or part of the way. Oh, I got another photo of care-killing scenery in Glacier. There we go. On this trip, besides looking at rocks and plants, Elrod was studying the lakes, plants, algae, invertebrates, diurnal activity, sediments, and everything. So besides all the other gear, he had a canvas collapsible boat, whole sets of thermometers, some kind of dredge. He was evaluating the lakes for productivity and fish stocking possibilities. they thought, well, okay, now there's going to be tourists here and they've got to have something to do. We have to be able to have them fish, so we need to stock the lakes. So this was undoubtedly the first time a boat had been on many of these lakes. They hauled this boat all over the place. This time on this trip, they were joined by Joseph Kirkwood. He was a new professor of botany. Elrod had hired him to start a botany department at the University of Montana. And Kirkwood tailored a number of his classes to forestry students. So this was really kind of the infancy of the forestry school. It was Joseph Kirkwood. So at first they would have gone past Avalanche Gorge. So they headed up the Lake McDonald or the McDonald Creek Valley. They went up past the gorge here to the lake. I was perturbed, but not too surprised to read in a Missoulian article published the next winter. Elrod wrote, to build a road for vehicles from Lake McDonald to Avalanche Lake will require no great engineering skill. And now that the government has created the park, we may expect roads to be built. This will doubtlessly be one of the first pieces of road as it opens up one of the nearest and finest bits of scenery in the park. Well, thank goodness we don't have a road to Avalanche Lake. We do up the valley. It will also open up a fine collecting field for the botanist and entomologist, as well as for the student of general zoology. Wooded mountains are full of rare treasures, now exceedingly difficult to procure because of the trouble in caring for them and getting them safely out of the woods. Well, now this idea of collecting a whole bunch of stuff, I mean, it seems pretty simplistic, but at the time there was still a lot of new species, new things to discover. So lots of people were collecting and cataloging, and Elrod was certainly, he was a big time collector. After a few days at Avalanche, they went on up to Granite Park. Here we tarried a week among the beds of flowers at the foot of the flow of lava. Well, there weren't glacier lilies in August. What it did look like more like that. The garden is ablaze with asters and daisies. The giant fleabane, western anemone, the yellow columbine line the creek. We climbed the Continental Divide and followed it along the very summit of the world. And here are pictures Elrod took on the trip up and down the Continental Divide. And he didn't take this. This again was later, but we know they popped over the divide right here to Grinnell Glacier because they collected plants there. Kirkwood collected plants up on Grinnell Mountain. And here Elrod wrote on the back of this, abandoned hopes. Presumably it would have been a prospector's cabin. My husband found this photo of the cabin earlier, 1896. Little more was going on. Of course, thank goodness, not much or anything of mineral wealth was found in the park, or it never would have been established. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time. This is an aerial picture. Here's Granite Park. Right here, the Highline Trail is a tremendous trail now. It goes all along this high country, but it wasn't built yet. So they went back down to Mineral Creek and then up to 50 Mountain. And you can see here, they had to go back down there rather than sticking up around here. Okay. Elrod says it's one vast carpet of flowers all the way for miles. It's just a tremendous place. Really spectacular. And they are. And here they are. They're camp at 50 Mountain. Some of the species they collected, Dawson's Angelica, which is a regional endemic, Lyle's penstemon, and fuzzy, I don't know even the common name, fuzzy Arnica, something like this. Before I found all this material in the UM archives, explaining where they went, I pieced together their itineraries just from the location and dates on Jones's plant collections. And then there were a whole number of plants in the herbarium at U of M from Jones in August 1910 from Greenwood's camp. Oh, sorry, one more thing. Oh, here's a specimen right here of um, uh, Dawson's Angelica. Anyway, I thought that was pretty cool. And here's some things he collected at Greenwood's camp. Pink corydalis, a real treat, horsetails, Sandberg's bluegrass. And I couldn't find anything about Greenwood's camp. Our archivist didn't know anything about it. We did a bunch of digging. Um, and then I found this photo in the archives of Greenwood's camp. Well, we pieced together finally that D.B. Greenwood was involved in logging operation up the Waterton Valley before the park, plans to drill for oil with the Waterton Oil Land and Power Company. The president of that company was J.P. Hansen. Where was all the money, even in Alberta, coming from? He was from Butte. We knew about an old road up the valley, didn't realize there'd been a logging camp. Hansen had a mill in Alberta on the Waterton River that was shut down in 1908 after a big flood. And so it looks like Greenwood's camp is probably abandoned here, and the logging operation was abandoned when the mill got washed out. So that makes sense. So they headed north past Kootenai Lakes here to goat hunt. And D. Blank was fortunate at Kootenai Lakes to see moose. It's not an uncommon sight. It's a wonderful place. And they headed to the head of Waterton Lake and they spent a few exploring. And here's a picture by Elrod that day. Waterton Lake looking toward Canada, and Jones wrote, "The lake fills a tortuous gorge and extends many miles to the northward, soon passing the international line. From here, they went to Lake Janet, which was then called Haunted Woman Lake. I will look at those great bedrolls. I want to go camping with them. And then on up to what Elrod called Dixon Lake. We now know it as Lake Francis, and they would have winding up to Brown Pass. They climb up, the trail climbs up around that way. Here there is a view from up above Brown's Pass, looking down, taken from Mount Chapman. Brown's Pass is down here. Okay. Here's our guys at Brown's Pass. Elrod loved it. He came back the next year and spent, I think, a couple weeks in the summer at Brown Pass. And here's another photo of Elrod looking north towards the Boundary Mountains. He also took this picture looking across at Boulder Glacier in 1910. And by 2007, it was gone. Pretty stark, amazing. So where did they go? Here's the foot of Waterton Lake to Lake Janet, Lake Francis, up to Brown Pass, and then down towards the head of Bowman Lake. Didn't look like anything like that. First of all, it was August, not October, but I love this picture. And it was August 18th. What year? 1910. What was going on in 1910? Elrod wrote, "We intended to stay longer, but forest fires were very menacing. We were unable to see nearby mountains, so we had no idea how bad the fire was, nor how close." I can't imagine. It must have been terrifying. I guess that happened to a lot of people back then. Well, as we know, fires in 1910 burned a lot. It looks like, not a whole lot in Glacier, but this is orange on orange. 120,000 acres burned in the park in 1910. A lot more in the years after that. We think of 1910, well, they stopped all the fires. They didn't get real good at putting out fires for quite a while. So they headed on south down the North Fork road. The inside North Fork Road in the park had been built in 1901 up to Kintla Lake. The Kintla Oil Company was There were some seeps, actually, the ones that, or the one at the head of Kentla Lake is just in the process of getting plugged. And of course, there was no significant oil was found, which was a really good thing. Again, it was all money coming from Butte. I read just recently some homesteaders' recollection about building that road and doing all this. I mean, it's a lot of heavy equipment, said they killed a lot of horses. Really remote place. So they headed on south, and Jones writes, the great yellow pines come in here and give a majestic tone to the vegetation. They've been picking up ponderosa pines. So they got to Sullivan Meadow, where Adair had his store and boarding house, and it was a really convenient stop, a day's ride from Belton, whether you were on your way to the oil wells at Kintla or to your homestead. They don't know who those pictures are. This may look familiar to some of you. In 1913, Adair moved his store out of the newly established park to Polbridge, and here he is years later. Some of you may recognize what's now the Northern Lights Saloon in Polbridge. So Elrod wrote, at Adair's place, we were caught by fire. By continuous pumping, getting water from his well, we saved his house, his store, his little barn, our supplies and collections. Adair, his men, and ourselves all working. And Elrod's still taking pictures. And these are with glass plates. It's not like some little point and shoot or whatever. And they headed on south the next day. Unfortunately, or whatever, we've seen a lot of this recent years. And here's a little bit about where they went. So head of Lake McDonald, up to Avalanche Lake, swung way up to Godon, up to the Canadian line, back. They've come back down the North Fork Road. This next picture, actually, Theodore Christian took over Adair's store in Sullivan Meadow. It was Ernest Christensen on Camas Creek. And here's a picture of Christensen Meadow that they would have gone through on Camas Creek. It's a great place to see blooming camas in June, not August, gone through there. And they spent the night at Josiah Rogers' homestead in Rogers Meadow. Josiah was a homesteader, big-time guide, took tourists even before the park. He'd taken Lyman Sperry on his first trip to what was Sperry Glacier, though he took him past Avalanche. Tragically, we know that this photo is before Elrod was there because that's his wife, Molly, and she died, I believe, in 1908. She got sick and didn't make it very far from the homestead. Anyway, the adventures of the previous days and the fire couldn't have rattled them because they were still collecting plants. So we want to thank the Rogers family for this photo. Is it Rogers Meadow? Here's Josiah Rogers and Molly. Here's the meadow today. And here are Josiah's great nieces. And we have to thank them for these photos. And there's some parallels between the Rogers family and the Deer Lodge farmers. These gals' dad's cows were being poisoned by the fluoride of the aluminum plant, and they fought the aluminum plant. Shirley Rogers Folkwine on the right here is a pretty long time Plant Society member. Great to have you, Shirley. And she's been raising the alarm about the plume of toxins in the site of the aluminum company. So she's still been taking the aluminum company to task. From here, they went on up over Howe Ridge. Josiah had built a trail over Howe Ridge to Lake McDonald. And that's the end of their trip and the end of my talk. Oh, no, not quite. Elrod was certainly enchanted with the new park. And while his role with the establishment of the park, some people at one point were saying, oh, yeah, well, no, he probably didn't have anything to do with it. But he gave literally hundreds of talks about Glacier's natural history all over Montana. He gave them, like, I think anybody would listen, school groups, civic groups, churches, and also numerous professional meetings on the East Coast. And he illustrated his talks with slides. He had hand colored slides, so kind of one of the first to use AV equipment. He was hired by the park as a naturalist in 1922, where he spent summers until 1929. This started the practice of hiring science professors as naturalists. And I speculate as pressure grew, things really changed in science and academia. A lot of pressure to publish, and so they weren't running around in parks. And when I came to the park in the 70s, high school biology teachers, there were a lot of high school teachers that were working seasonal in the park. Um, and believe it or not, one of the things the naturalists did was they picked flowers, hundreds of them, to put in glass jars in the hotels. I read that, well, you couldn't expect ladies to get their skirts dirty, so they brought them flowers to see. On the back of this photo, it says that Elrod was 74 species of plants. Anyway, Elrod wrote a couple of guides. This is the first one. Remember that photo up on Sperry Glacier? Another version. Elrod had a stroke in 1934, fairly young, but he survived a bunch of years later and he died at 89. I don't think the scenery killed quite enough of Jones's cares. His wife Anna divorced him soon after the trip. And Jones drifted away from botany for a number of years. He came back to the park in 1919 with Elrod because he was collecting plants at Swift Current Pass and Grinnell Glacier. And then in 1923, Pomona College bought his huge plant collection and he moved with it to Claremont, California. With this, his spirits and interest in botany was really rekindled, possibly due to the financial security he had for probably the first time in his life. Some credit his abandonment of the fundamental Christianity he had earlier that caused him so much supposedly emotional turmoil, conflicting as it did with his scientific knowledge. Who knows? The age of 82, Jones was killed in a car wreck, but he was coming back from a collecting trip. You can read more. There are essays about Elrod and Jones in the Montana Pioneer Botanists. It's out of print, but there's lots of copies in the libraries around Montana. So I hope you get it there. And that's pretty much all I've got. Thank you for sticking with me. I do feel since this is going to get archived on YouTube, I need to say some things. Please don't poach the pictures I've been given permission to use. And of course, many thanks for all the photographs. A whole bunch of them you may note from Dee Blank, longtime Plant Society member, tremendous photographer. You'll see a lot of her things in Montana Outdoors. She also, I think it's still in print, has a great, reasonably priced book, Montana Wildflowers, good Christmas present. Photos from lots of other people and other help from all sorts. So thank you. Thanks for joining me today. And that's it.
Thank you, Rachel. That was wonderful. Um, yeah, we I think the audience was just captivated. The photos were, for me at least, I was so entranced by photos. So we don't have any burning questions in the chat. I did want to hear how you got out of your sticky situation with a broken leg.
Okay, should I stop screen sharing?
Oh, it doesn't, I don't think it matters.
Oh, well, my husband worked for the park and he had a park radio.
Okay.
There was actually another rescue going on at the time, and the reception was really poor for where we were. He had to climb way up, but he actually was able to, they were able to find somebody with a couple horses. People said, "Oh, did you get a helicopter?" Well, of course not. It was way too windy.
Oh my gosh. That that sounds like
Anyway,
a wild and kind of scary experience.
but and it was broken. I was glad. You never know. It's like, is this a bad sprain? This is like a really big deal to get out of here. But no,
Yeah.
it was broken. I got back out, off on horseback, though.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's a good story to have. Oh, it looks like we have someone. Yeah, go ahead. I don't want to Wenfie?
That was my own misspelling of my typographical error. I'm Wendy.
Oh, hi, Wendy.
I'm gonna.
Hi. I really enjoyed that so much. Thank you so very much. I'm just sort of interested in if students at Montana get to study Elrod's collections now that botany programs are being folded into other environmental, sciences, and they're not going out and doing field studies anymore. Are they still able to study his collections?
Boy, do we have somebody from U of M?
Yeah. I mean, are students able to study the collections since they're not going out in the field themselves anymore? I
Well,
mean,
they can certainly study the herbarium collections,
right.
um, which is pretty remarkable. And the way I accessed most of this was many herbariums have digitized their holdings, so they have great databases, and then have also taken pictures of them. You can go to
Oh, that's
the
great.
Consortium of Pacific Northwest Herbaria and search for all sorts of things and see these specimens. But of course, the herbariums at both MSU and Eastern and U of M are open to the public. So those collections, yes, um, are available. I don't know about Elrod's other. He was a real collector and museum. He had museums. So I don't
Yeah.
know.
Very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, Wendy used the raise hand function, which should be either again at the top or bottom of your screen. You're welcome to do that. Or if anyone wants to unmute and ask a question, you're welcome to do so. Rachel, I don't know if you're looking in the chat at all, but there are many thank yous if you care to scroll. Let's see. Susan Petit, do you want to ask a question? Let's see. We'll ask. You're still muted.
Okay, now?
Okay, there you go.
Okay. So I was wondering, did Elrod get any funding from anybody at any time for his investigations and his collections?
She was a professor at the University of Montana, but from what I could tell, they weren't real well paid because they all seemed to be
Right.
scrambling all the time to, publish other things, teach, whatever. So
Yeah.
I as he set up museums in the park. He was hired as a naturalist there, but he was a professor at the University of Montana. The pay may not have been much, and
Yeah.
actually.
Tiny.
C. Leo Hitchcock noted in the 30s they were trying to recruit him to the University of Washington, which they succeeded. But he said it was a regular thing that the merchants in Missoula would not cash paychecks from the University of Montana because they weren't any good.
Oh my. Okay. So he really did this on his own. He really just out of the love of
Yeah,
collecting and
he certainly was fascinated by
Wow.
stuff, but they all seem to be always, hoping to publish, trying to make some more money. And there's notes in his archives about, well, it would cost this much to print, and we could sell it for,
Yeah.
$2 or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
Okay.
And I want to I think all three of Josiah Rogers' great nieces may be zooming in here. I don't know if they have anything to say, but just a particular welcome to them. And a number of people here. Dee, again, thank you for your wonderful, wonderful pictures. Okay.
There's a question in the chat from Sam saying, do we know if there are plants they documented then that are no longer found in the park?
No. And, Andrea Pip, I think, is on here. Nothing that we know of. No. And whether there are plants that other people have documented that are no longer present, I don't know. One thing I was trying to sort of move along, Pete Lessica has been monitoring those Arctic alpine plants at the southern edge of their range. Pete, are you on here? For, I think, nearly 40 years, if not yet 40 years. And none of them have completely dropped off that I've heard of, but some of them aren't doing real great. And some some, of course, taxonomy has changed. Some names may have changed of things. So no, nothing I know of. We have a lot of new plants. We've got a lot of weeds that weren't there that are now. So, well, great. Thank you.
Well, Rachel, you just I feel like that talk was so interesting because it was so clearly a space that you have so much familiarity with and have spent so much time and thought around. It really that really came through for me.
Well, thanks, Alex. And I think as many of us in Montana know, it's not a hard place to fall in love with. Yeah, I feel incredibly fortunate to have spent so much time there. Thank you. And it's great to share this with everyone.
Well, thank you. Any last questions? I mean, I would like to hear your next talk being your own work in the park. Maybe you can come up with that next time.
Move on. There's a number of people who on here tonight that have quite the histories on their own history in the park. It's nice to see those names. Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone so much. Join us again in about a month. Remember the third Tuesday of January, we will be here again. So I hope you all have a safe and happy holiday. And thank you all so much for supporting this program, and take care.